Last chance!
Come on, do it! Just do it, come on, do it!
Cliff and Sydney, a newly married couple, are on their honeymoon in Hawaii. They're watching their wedding video, reliving those good times. Sydney even films Cliff driving their Jeep. Next, they take a romantic helicopter ride to another Hawaiian island, soaking in the awesome views. The beauty just blows them away. They stop at a shop to grab some hiking gear. After a quick kiss, they're back on the road. As they drive, they roll over a newspaper. The headline screams, "A newlywed couple found dead in Honolulu." That's the city Cliff and Sydney just left. The article says the killer brutally ripped out the victim's teeth and cut off their fingerprints, all to keep them from being identified. And get this, the killer is still on the loose in Hawaii. Cliff and Sydney are totally clueless about the danger. They're just focused on hitting Malai Beach to start their hike. On the way, a couple, Kale and Cleo, try to hitch a ride. Cliff pulls over, but Sydney isn't big on picking up strangers. She's pretty annoyed when Cliff stops. But before she can really complain, Kale and Cleo start throwing their bags in the Jeep. Their names are right there on their bags, Kale and Cleo. Cleo hops in and asks if they're heading to Lumahai Beach. Sydney lies, saying they're just going a short distance. Cliff isn't a fan of Kale's tattoos or his scruffy look either, so he backs up Sydney's lie. Kale gets the message. Cleo, trying to be friendly, starts showing them wedding photos. She says they got married on Oahu. That's the same island where those murders happened in Honolulu. Seeing the photos, Sydney starts to feel a connection with Cleo, so she agrees to give them a lift. Cleo is thrilled and hugs Sydney, but Kale is still fuming about them initially refusing a ride. He starts yelling at them and tells Cleo to get out of the Jeep right away. Cleo gets out, angry too. Cliff and Sydney are shocked by their aggressive outburst and quickly drive off. About 10 miles later, they hit Lumahai Beach. They forget all about the weird encounter and start snapping happy photos. Then they head out on their hike, taking the small, winding mountain paths. But they quickly stop. The path is super narrow, slippery, and there are sharp rocks in the deep gorge below. They're hesitant to go on. Just then, a guy named Nick comes walking down the path. Nick easily crosses the tricky spot, totally fearless. He guides Cliff and Sydney, telling them they need to move fast to get across. Nick's guidance gives Cliff courage, and he makes it across too. Sydney tries to follow, but a helicopter flies overhead. The noise startles Sydney, and she almost falls into the ravine. Cliff grabs her hand and pulls her back from the brink of death. That close call really shakes Sydney. They thank Nick and continue their journey with him. Nick feels like he's seen Cliff somewhere before. He asks Cliff if he works in TV. Cliff says Nick is probably mistaken because they've just met. He explains he doesn't work in TV, but he's an up-and-coming screenwriter, and his first script is already being made into a film. Further down the trail, they run into three scared girls. They're stressed because their phones have no signal. One girl tells him that when she briefly got a signal, her dad called and told her about the newlywed murder in Honolulu. She says the police found out the killer is a young couple. That's why they were searching for a signal to learn more. Cliff and Sydney are terrified when they hear this. Since they just came from Honolulu, Cliff and Nick immediately check their phones, but still no signal. Cliff is so scared he wants to turn back, but Sydney doesn't want to cut their honeymoon short. She tries to calm Cliff, saying the incident happened in Honolulu on Oahu, and they're on a different island, Kauai, so they don't need to worry. The three continue their trek. After a bit, they stop. Sydney and Cliff were planning to head to a beach, but Nick is going to a secret waterfall. Sydney read about the secret waterfall in her guidebook and is excited to go with Nick. Nick is cool with them joining, but Cliff tries to stop Sydney, saying they shouldn't invade Nick's privacy. Nick walks on ahead. Then Cliff sees Kale and Cleo approaching from behind, the same couple who got angry when Cliff and Sydney wouldn't give them a lift. Scared, Cliff changes his mind and decides to stick with Nick. Sydney is happy. They follow Nick again. After about a mile, they reach the secret waterfall. Cliff and Sydney are stunned to see a naked girl, Gina, lying on a raft below the waterfall. She's Nick's girlfriend. Nick strips down, joins her, and starts kissing her. He introduces Gina to Cliff and Sydney and invites him to get in the water. But Cliff is bothered that Nick never mentioned Gina before. This makes Cliff suspicious of Nick. Sydney, though, is super excited to join Nick and Gina. She tells Cliff to come along, but a scared Cliff is desperate to find out more about the killers in Hawaii. So he leaves Sydney and climbs up to find network signal. Sydney takes off all her clothes and joins Nick and Gina. Cliff gets a signal as soon as he climbs the hill. When he Googles the Hawaii murders, he finds out something new. The killers have fled to Kauai. That's the island Cliff and Sydney are on right now. Reading this, Cliff is horrified. Cliff starts to leave, but Kale blocks his way. Before Kale can do anything to Cliff, Nick shows up, smiling, and tries to calm things down. Seeing Nick, Kale backs off Cliff, but before he goes, Kale tells Cliff they'll definitely meet again. because they're heading to the same beach. Cliff ignores them and leaves with Nick. Back at the waterfall, Cliff tells Sydney they need to head to the beach ASAP. Nick and Gina are also going to that beach, so they decide to leave with Cliff and Sydney. Cliff checks his bag for their beach permits, but they're not there. He's shocked. Then he spots Kale's bag. He starts to suspect Kale and Cleo stole their permits. He checks their bags too, but the permits aren't there either. However, in Kale's bag, Cliff finds a business card for Pro Legend. Cliff figures Kale might be an ex-con on parole. After that, Cliff doesn't waste any time. He and Sydney, along with Nick and Gina, head for their destination. On the way, Nick tells Cliff and Sydney that he used to work for a special ops unit in the military. Nick really wants Cliff to write a script about his life, so he starts telling them his incredible stories. Nick says he was in the Iraq War. He tells them a landmine exploded right behind him during the war, putting a hole in his skull. Doctors put a titanium metal plate in his head to save him. He says having that titanium plate in his skull has always been a good thing. When he goes through a metal detector, security sees the metal in his head and lets him pass without searching him. Because of that, they never notice his little friend Gilligan. When Cliff and Sydney hear Gilligan, they're confused, wondering who Nick is talking about. Then Nick pulls up his pants and shows them his friend Gilligan, a sharp knife. Sydney and Cliff are speechless when they see the knife. At this point, Gina boasts that Nick is not easy to kill. Hearing this, Cliff starts to feel uncomfortable continuing the journey with Nick and Gina, but he's scared, so he just keeps going with them. Later, Nick and Gina cross a river and get ahead. That's when Cliff gets cell phone signal. He tells Sydney he needs to pee and takes her behind a tree. Cliff shows her the police CCTV photo of the killers. Sydney is shocked because the killers in the photo somewhat resemble Nick and Gina, but the photo is blurry, so it's hard to make out their faces. Sydney can't believe Nick and Gina are the killers. She says that for all the time she spent with Gina, she never felt like Gina was a murderer. But Cliff is terrified. He thinks Nick's stories about his life were all lies. Just then, as Cliff and Sydney turn to leave, they see Nick and Gina looking at them. After that, they all start moving towards their destination again. Along the way, they see two warning signs about narrow paths and problems caused by heavy rain. Because of the heavy rain, they stop and set up camp. Suddenly, an unknown person is seen patrolling around their camp. The next moment, Nick stands frozen, staring into the jungle, as if he's seen a ghost. After watching him stand there for a long time, the others nervously look into the jungle too. Nick then turns back and tells them he saw a herd of goats in the jungle. With that, Nick prepares a bow and arrow from his gear, getting ready to hunt a goat for dinner. But Cliff doesn't believe Nick. He scans the trees himself, but sees no goats. Nick hands Cliff his axe and tells him to come hunting. But seeing Nick's bow and arrow, Cliff is terrified that Nick might kill him in the jungle, so he flat out refuses to go with Nick. Nick then calls Cliff a scaredy cat and makes fun of him in front of the girls. After that, to prove his manliness, Cliff has no choice but to go with Nick. As they walk through the jungle, Nick suddenly stops behind Cliff. He knocks an arrow and tells Cliff he knows Cliff thinks he and Gina are killers. Nick goes on to say that Cliff is wrong to think they're killers. He also makes it clear that he and Gina initially thought Cliff and Sydney were the killers. But Cliff's suspicions about Nick haven't gone away. He asks Nick why he's hunting when he hasn't seen any goats. Nick tells him that someone is following them. He saw the shadows of two people in the jungle, so he's here to find them, not to hunt. Cliff gets scared and tries to go to Sydney to protect her, but Nick stops him, saying that if Gina is with Sydney, he doesn't need to worry. After saying that, Nick starts his investigation. Meanwhile, Sydney and Gina are sitting in the camp, talking. Gina asks Sydney if she's ever been attracted to anyone other than Cliff. Sydney says she only wants to have children with Cliff and live a peaceful life. Gina doesn't believe her, saying that no one's life is perfect and everyone has a past. Then Sydney reveals a secret she's kept buried in her heart for years. She says that before Cliff, there was a guy named Rocky in her life. Everyone thought Rocky was a decent guy. She became obsessed with his dark and risky style. Then one night, Rocky took her on a date to a lake. They were wrapped up in their passion, but then Rocky turned on the car's headlights and told Sydney to go outside the car and look in a pile of leaves. When she looked in the pile of leaves, she found a dead neighborhood dog. Rocky had strangled it himself. He also threatened Sydney that if she ever told anyone, he would kill her too. Sydney gets very emotional telling this story. Gina asks Sydney if she ever told anyone about it. Sydney says she never told anyone until now. In the jungle, Nick continues to scare and tease Cliff as he searches for the killer, annoying Cliff a lot. Then Cliff spots a couple camping with a campfire. Seeing them, Cliff stops and quietly calls Nick to look at them too. But Nick doesn't hear him and keeps going on his own. When Cliff goes to look at the couple, he only sees a girl there now. But the next moment, a guy suddenly appears behind Cliff. As soon as Cliff senses him, he pounces on him with his axe. But then Cliff sees that the guy is just the worker from the shop where they bought their hiking gear. The worker was only there to return Cliff's permit, which Cliff had forgotten at their shop. After learning this, Cliff lets him go, apologizes, and returns to camp. Sometime later, Nick also returns to camp with a hunted goat. Gina and Nick butcher the goat so brutally that it makes Cliff and Sydney's hearts sink just watching them. Seeing Gina and Nick's vicious behavior, Sydney is now convinced that Nick and Gina are indeed the real killers. Thinking this, Cliff and Sydney are terrified. They go into their tent and start making a plan to escape from them. Cliff explains that they can't just run away from them because they are in a secluded area and the beach is 2 miles away. So they'll have to act happy and friendly with Nick and Gina until they reach the beach, so they don't suspect that Cliff and Sydney know their true nature. Sydney thinks Cliff is right. After that, they both fall asleep. The next morning, Cliff hears a helicopter and comes out of the tent. He sees that the police are searching for the killers by helicopter. Luckily, a little later, the police find the real killers hiding in the jungle. When Cliff, Sydney, and Gina run to see the killers, they find out it's none other than Kale and Cleo. The police find some tools in the teeth of the murdered people as evidence with them. So the police immediately arrest both of them. Both Kale and Cleo keep pleading their innocence to the police, but the police don't listen and take them away. Seeing this, Gina, Sydney, and Cliff become carefree. Then Gina reveals to Cliff and Sydney that she actually suspected them of being the killers. Cliff and Sydney also tell Gina that they both suspected Gina and Nick. Hearing this, the three of them look at each other and laugh. Now that the killers have been caught, the four of them, feeling carefree, head towards the beach with new enthusiasm. They capture some beautiful memories on their camera and finally reach the beach. There, they start having fun with the other hikers on the beach. After some time, Cliff comes to Nick and asks him to go see the sea caves with him. Cliff had paid some hikers to borrow their 2 boats for this. Nick, however, immediately says no, as he had other plans with Gina for that evening. But Cliff insists more, so Nick agrees. After that, they both take a boat and head towards the sea caves. Before leaving, Nick tells Sydney to tell Gina that they will be back from the sea caves by evening. A few moments later, Gina arrives. Sydney tells her that Nick and Cliff are going to the sea caves and will be back before dark. Hearing this, Gina starts recording them leaving with her camera. Gina then notices a memory card in the camera. When Gina inserts the card, she finds Cliff and Sydney's wedding photos. Gina starts looking at them happily. While looking, Gina sees something in those photos that makes her eyes pop out. She immediately drops the camera and starts shouting for Nick to come back. But unfortunately, Nick can't hear her. Gina tries to call Nick, but her phone has no network. Seeing this, Gina gets very upset. She picks up her axe and runs towards the sea cave using a different path. Seeing Gina running like that, Sydney also comes there. After looking at the same photo in her camera, she also starts running after Gina. Actually, the photo Gina saw in the camera was of the real Cliff and Sydney. But the people Nick and Gina had been traveling with all this time were not the real Cliff and Sydney, but their killers. In reality, Cliff was that crazy Rocky whom Sydney had told Gina about. Both of them had killed the real Sydney and Cliff who had come for their honeymoon and removed their teeth and fingerprints so no one could identify them. Then those killers had learned everything about Cliff and Sydney by watching their wedding video on Cliff's camera. They also learned to talk just like them. And since then, both of them had been living their honeymoon as Cliff and Sydney. The blurry picture of the killer on the internet was of none other than Rocky and Sydney. Rocky was addicted to methamphetamine, a drug that makes a person as angry as a devil. And after taking that drug, Crazy Rocky would turn into a monster. Whoever's personality he liked, he would kill them, steal their identity, and live like them. Sydney unwillingly supported him in this because she loved Rocky from the bottom of her heart. But Rocky only kept her for his own gain. He even made Sydney addicted to the drug. During this, we also see Nick and Gina in a flashback, who were in Honolulu on the day of the murder. That day, when Sydney and Rocky, after changing their disguises, were leaving Honolulu by boat, Nick and Gina also started running towards that boat, but they missed the boat. Later, Rocky and Sydney met Kale and Cleo. Unknowingly, Kale and Cleo picked a fight with Rocky and Sydney and became their scapegoats. When Rocky found Kale and Cleo's bag at the waterfall, he hid his tools and the victim's teeth in their bag. Then, when Rocky met the shop worker in the jungle, he told that worker to report Kale and Cleo as the killers to the police. And then as soon as that worker informed the police arrested Kale and Cleo with evidence. In this way, Rocky and Sydney cleverly tricked the police and were still freely roaming in Hawaii. During their journey, when Sydney and Rocky met Nick and Gina, they decided to make Nick and Gina their next victims so they could also steal their identities. As soon as Gina found out the truth about Rocky and Sydney, she left for the sea caves via the mountain path. But she still hadn't found Nick. However, Rocky had already taken Nick to the sea caves. Meanwhile, Nick notices Rocky's strange and twisted words and realizes that Rocky's personality has suddenly changed. As soon as Nick senses something wrong with Rocky's behavior, he becomes cautious of Rocky. Then Rocky takes off his glasses and breaks them. As soon as Nick feels threatened by Rocky, he takes his knife in his hand. But before he could use the knife, Rocky shot Nick with his gun. Just then, Gina also arrives there. She screams when she sees Nick dying. Seeing her, Rocky also fires wildly at her, but Gina dodges and survives. But unfortunately, Sydney also arrived there chasing Gina. She was moving towards Gina with a knife. Seeing her, Gina also picks up her axe. But Sydney jumps on her, causing Gina's axe to fall and roll down the hill. It lands very close to Rocky and goes into Nick's boat. After that, Gina and Sydney start fighting. Then Sydney kicks Gina in the stomach, knocking her down. Sydney then picks up her knife and runs towards Gina. However, Gina moves out of the way at the last moment, and Sydney falls straight into the water below. But before falling, Sydney stabs Gina in the leg with her knife. In pain, Gina takes the knife out of her leg and starts looking for signal on her phone. Luckily, she gets a call from a telemarketing agent. Gina desperately asks for help, telling him her current situation. Gina tells him to call the police and send help here as soon as possible. But that agent isn't paying attention to what she's saying. Sydney tries to manipulate him quite a bit. Then Gina sees Sydney in the boat. Sydney is giving some instructions to Rocky on a walkie-talkie. Before Gina can understand anything, Rocky suddenly grabs her legs. Gina somehow frees herself from him. After that, Rocky starts firing wildly at her. But luckily, Gina also escapes from him. Just then, Gina finds an opportunity and stabs her knife into Rocky's hand. Rocky cries out in pain. Then, seeing the opportunity, Gina runs away from there. But crazy Rocky pulls the knife out of his hand and climbs onto the hill. He tells Sydney that Gina has asked someone for help on the phone. So before the police arrive here, Rocky tells Sydney to go to the beach and mislead the police. And he himself becomes death and goes after Gina. Meanwhile, Nick is still alive and breathing. It turns out Rocky's bullet hit the metal plate in Nick's skull. Because of this, Rocky's bullet was ineffective. Now Nick picks up his axe to take revenge on Rocky and goes after him. Meanwhile, as Gina is running to escape from Cliff, some people catch her. One of those men was from an emergency medical team. Seeing Gina injured, they wanted to bandage her. Gina tells them that a murderer is chasing her to kill her, but those people don't realize the seriousness of Gina's fear. So Gina tries to shake them off and run away, but they are not letting her go anywhere in her injured condition. Just then, Rocky arrives there, and again, pretending to be innocent. He tells those people that Gina is his friend. He says that she is addicted to methamphetamine, so she is running wild and away from him. However, the medical team's man saw the symptoms of methamphetamine, not in Gina, but in Rocky himself. Because taking this drug makes the pupils of the drug user's eyes bigger. So they understand that Rocky is lying to them. But then, seeing his disguise exposed, Rocky shoots all those people who came to help Gina. Seeing this, Gina runs away in fear. As soon as Rocky is about to shoot Gina, Nick jumps on him from above with a knife, and he slashes his hands with his knife. However, during this, Nick also got grazed by Rocky's bullet, but he gets up again and picks up his knife, moving towards Rocky. During this, Rocky's hands are severely injured, so when he shoots at Nick, none of his shots hit Nick. Just then, Nick takes Rocky's gun from him. He puts the gun to his neck and is about to kill him when Sydney arrives there with the police in a helicopter. And misleading the police, she starts telling them that Nick is their culprit. The policemen also believe Sydney and tell Nick to put down his weapon, but Nick is still determined to kill Rocky. Seeing this, the policemen also aim their guns at Nick. They are about to shoot Nick when Gina arrives there. Gina kicks Rocky and throws him to the ground, and she takes Nick away from there. Seeing this, the policemen also stop their attack. Seeing Nick and Gina's true love for each other, Sydney's humanity also awakens. She always wanted Rocky to love her like that, but she never got all that from Rocky. But now she realizes her mistake. She tells the policeman that Rocky is the real killer roaming on the beach, and as a creature of habit, he will also attack with a gun. Hearing this, the policemen shoot Rocky before he can attack, and in this way, evil comes to an end. Then at the end, when the police are taking Nick and Gina to the hospital by helicopter, Nick proposes marriage to Gina. After this, they both kiss each other, and in this way, the film ends right here. This is how this fantasy movie ends. Give it a like, subscribe to the channel, see you in the next video.